Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military of a Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 12th of May of 2025. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And this video I would like to start with several statements that were made by German and French authorities. Most likely by the time you're gonna watch this video we're gonna get additional statements from different politicals from the United Kingdom, probably from Poland, maybe from the United States of America. So let's discuss in details, and first let's talk about the statement that we got from Germany. Putin has 10 hours to respond about the ceasefire. The clock is ticking. The spokesman of German government Cornelius. Russia must respond to the proposal for a ceasefire in Ukraine for 30 days by the end of this day, so by the end of the 12th of May of 2025. Otherwise, the Russian Federation will face sanctions. So this is the first statement that we got today on the 12th of May of 2025. Later, we got similar statement made by the president of France, Macron. Macron also issued an ultimatum to Putin. Moscow has until tonight. He said that today he will hold regular talks with Zelensky and European leaders because the US and European Union proposal for the Russian Federation regarding an unconditional 30-day ceasefire is valid until only until Monday evening. So we don't know for sure what kind of sanctions the Western countries and the European Union are going to issue against Russia, but most likely to all these statements, these sanctions are going to be very strong. For example, when talking about the Russian Federation today, they gave answer. Kremlin, the language of ultimatums is unacceptable for Moscow. It is impossible to talk to Russia in such a language. So this is most likely an answer to the Western countries regarding their ultimatum and regarding their 30-day ceasefire. Russia have just one plan. Russia has just a plan to have talks, direct talks on the territory of Istanbul on the 15th of May of 2025. Today we got a lot of statements that Zelensky accepted this proposal, but as for now, Erdogan's administration told RIA Novosti that there is no information about Zelensky's plans to visit Turkey on May 15th. Anyway, obviously the Western countries are going to complete their ultimatum, and most likely tomorrow we are going to see the biggest sanction package against Russia, and most likely this sanction package will first of all be connected with Russian shadow fleet or something like this. So we see that tomorrow on the 13th of May of 2025 another wave of escalation is waiting for us. Anyway, let's wait and see, because the situation is very interesting. Once again, while the Western countries are going to issue another package of sanctions against Russia, we always remember that Chasiv Yar is ready to launch Oreshnik. Now let's talk about the situation on the ground. We have lots of very important updates, and this video I would like to start with the Zaporizhia direction. We already talked about this area in the previous video, because during the previous video we noted that there are a lot of icons from this area, and during the day we got additional icons from this territory where we can see how the Russians were attacking and bombing Ukraine positions between the settlements of Kamenska, Stepnogorsk, Malый Sherbaki and Stepova. Telling the truth, too many icons in this area, which means that most likely the Russians are planning something. Usually when we see this number of icons, this means that in the very near future the Russians are planning to begin another offensive operation. As for the current stage, most likely the Russians will try to do something right before the talks that are going to take place in Istanbul on the 15th of May of 2025. This is a usual and regular practice of the Russian side to begin another offensive operation right before another round of talks to have stronger positions during this or that negotiations. So very interesting situation. We are waiting for additional updates from this area. As for the previous 24 hours, as you can see, the Russians attacked and destroyed a lot of Ukrainian equipment and a lot of positions of Ukrainian FPV drone operators, and of course the Russians, as usually, were hunting and attacking Ukrainian artillery systems. So let's wait and see what is going to be next. Now let's move further and let's talk about the South Donetsk direction. There are very heavy clashes for the settlement of Batiri. Today we got a lot of updates from this area. According to information we have, the Russians managed to improve their positions significantly on the territory of the settlement of Batiri. By the end of the 12th of May of 2025, according mainly to pro-Russian resources, the armed force of the Russian Federation managed to establish complete control over this territory. The Russians took under control the southern part of the settlement. Also, the Russians established complete control over this company's stronghold. The Ukrainians have their positions just in the northwestern and the northeastern parts of the settlement, but we understand that Ukrainians most likely will not be able to hold their positions for a very long period of time. You know that several pro-Ukrainian sources made several articles in their social networks, and the pro-Ukrainian sources described the situation in the city, in the village of Bogatyr, using the next words: control over the village of Bogatyr is melting before our eyes. So these are the words of Ukrainian soldier on the ground from this settlement. Most likely, as we discussed in the previous video, the Ukrainians would be forced to fall back from this area, and most likely they're going to do this during the upcoming night between the 12th and the 13th of May of 2025, and most likely the Ukrainians would abandon their positions towards the village of Alexeyevka. Furthermore, according to several pro-Russian resources, as a result of offensive operation, the armed forces of the Russian Federation during the previous 24 hours managed to answer the southern part of the settlement of Odradne. If this information is correct, then something like this, the Russians start controlling by the end of the 12th of May of 2025. The situation is critical for Ukrainians. At the same time, the armed forces of the Russian Federation continue developing their offensive operation from the settlement of Andreevka with the purpose to outflank the settlement of Alexeyevka from the north and from the northwest with the purpose to attack the western outskirts of the village. As for this attack, the Russians most likely will not be able to do this just as a result of one offensive, but the main purpose of this offensive operation is to force the Ukrainians not to stay in the area of Alexeyevka for a very long period of time. Most likely those Ukrainians that are going to retreat from the settlement of Bogatyr when they realize that the Russians are advancing from the north would continue moving further in the western directions towards the settlement of Zeleny Kut and Novoukrainka. So we expect complete collapse of these positions of the armed forces of Ukraine during the next 72 hours. Now let's talk about the Novopavlovka direction. During the previous 24 hours, we got lots of very important updates from this area. Let's talk first of all about the settlement of Goryokhovo. This is the last settlement in this area where Ukrainians have some positions. But according to several pro-Russian resources, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions significantly. The armed forces of the Russian Federation during the previous day managed to take under complete control the most southern part of the settlement and the central part. Currently, the Ukrainians, according to information we have, control just the northwestern part of the settlement, and most likely during this upcoming night the Ukrainians would be forced to fall back from this area further in the western direction. But the problem is that if Ukrainians decide to fall back, they will be forced to fall back already on the territory of the Dnipro region, because this is the border. This is the border between Donetsk and Dnipro regions, and the Russians are about to answer this territory as well. Very interesting detail is coming from a bit further in the northeastern direction from the settlement of Kotliarivka. Today, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation reported that as a result of clashes, the units of the Group of Forces Center managed to establish complete control over this settlement. Few hours later, the Russian resources published this video where we can see how Russians established another Russian flag above another settlement in this area. Based on this video, and this video was geolocated immediately, based on this video we have adjusted the map as well as many other mappers and sources. So this is the situation by the end of the 11th of May of 2025. So this territory used to be considered as a contested area or the gray zone, and as for the end of the 12th of May of 2025, we colored this territory completely. So there are no more settlements in front of the Russians before entering the Dnipro region, which is obviously going to happen very soon, and most likely even before the beginning of the talks that are going to take place in Istanbul on the 15th of May of 2025. Now let's move further. Let's talk about the Pokrovsk direction. During the previous 24 hours, several pro-Russian resources made several adjustments on their maps, and according to several pro-Russian resources, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to improve their positions in the southwestern part of the settlement of Zverova. So by the end of the 12th of May, the Russians established control over something like this. Furthermore, the Russians continue bombing and attacking the settlement of Leontovichi. This is already the southwestern outskirts and a part of Pokrovsk the Pokrovsk agglomeration. In this video we can see very powerful multiple launch rockets strike on Ukrainian positions in this area. This video was geolocated as well. The Russians were bombing this part. So based on the fact that the Russians improved their positions in the area Zverova completely and significantly, we got geolocations that confirm this. We believe that the Russians may try to attack further in the northeastern direction with the purpose to establish complete control over this territory as well, because as we just discussed, Russia's main goal in this part of the special military operation is to establish complete control over this southwestern part of the Pokrovsk agglomeration, which will be something like a huge media victory, and obviously this can lead to complete collapse of Ukrainian defense in this direction as well. So the situation is very interesting, and the Russians can start offensive operation or a major assault of the city of Pokrovsk in the very near future, and it can happen much faster than we expect. When talking about the southeastern flank of the Pokrovsk agglomeration, we have changes on the ground. I'll remind you that since the beginning of May we got one video where we can see how the Russians were trying to attack to the west of the settlement of Grodovka. In this video we can see Russian vehicles that were moving towards the Ukrainian positions and Ukrainian strongholds. When the Ukrainians discovered the movement of the Russian forces, they began bombing and attacking the Russians with FPV drones. And in this video we can see how Ukrainians managed to damage and destroy several Ukrainian vehicles along the roads of 544 between Grodovka and this, let's say, fortification. So based on this video, I remember we did make the conclusion that most likely the Russians managed to attack this stronghold, but as for the beginning of May, we didn't have any geolocation that could confirm Russian progress on the ground in this area, but we promised to keep this information in our minds. And today, on the 12th of May, we got additional details from this area, but as for now, we got additional geolocations to the northeast from this complex network of the fortifications. We are talking about this Zhuravka River and Казенный Torets Reservoir. This video was published by the Ukrainian sources, and in this video we can see how Ukrainians were attacking Russian units and Russian soldiers in this area. Lots of episodes how Ukrainians were attacking Russians that were moving along the dam, through these tree lines and so on. Several episodes were geolocated, especially this episode how Ukrainians attacked a lone Russian soldier along the dam. This attack took place exactly in this point, and based on this geolocation we have adjusted the map. So let's discuss the adjustments in details. This is the situation by the end of the 11th of May of 2025, and this is the situation by the end of the 12th of May of 2025. Now we see that the Russians are trying to outflank this complex network of fortifications to the west of Grodovka from the northeast and from the north. And as for now, the Russians are trying to take under control this stronghold. This is very important stronghold, because if the Russians are able to establish complete control over this territory, the Russians will be able to cut the supply and support of these strongholds and to cut this territory from the mainland. And the Ukrainians from these positions would be forced to fall back further in the northwestern directions towards the settlement of Mirnograd. So very interesting operation, offensive operation, or the special operation the Russians are trying to carry out right now in this area. The main purpose of the Russians, of course, we understand, is to maintain the lines and to take these strongholds under complete control and to connect Russian positions in the vicinity of Mykolaiivka with Russian positions in the area of Miralyubovka. So this is offensive operation from the southeastern flank of the Pokrovsk agglomeration. Now we see that the Russians are pushing the settlement, this agglomeration, both from the southwestern and from the southeastern directions. Now let's move further. Let's talk about the Kiban Bookska reservoir or Kiban Bookska pocket. We have additional videos, additional icons with FPV drones. You know that since the beginning of May we have received lots of icons and lots of videos how the Russians were FPV droning and attacking Ukrainian equipment in this area. Obviously we see that Ukrainians managed to concentrate a lot of forces to create a lot of fortifications, a lot of equipment in this area with the purpose to slow down the Russians. And most likely the Ukrainians managed to slow down the Russians at least a little bit, but we see that the Russians, they're not counting their drones, they're attacking and attacking every single day. We got hundreds and thousands of videos where we can see how the Russians destroy Ukrainian equipment. If we increase the numbers of this since the beginning of months, we see that this area is over concentrated with Russian fire. This is the primary task, the primary target, and the Russians continue continue advancing. As for the previous 24 hours, we have just several changes. Several pro-Russian resources reported that the Russians managed to improve their positions and to cut this pocket between the settlements of Kalinova and the settlement of Valentinovka. So this pocket is already under complete Russian control. This is very important because now the Russians managed to improve their logistic and they managed to shorten the distances. They managed to shorten the distances between Russian different areas of offensive operation. At the same time, according to information we have, the Russians managed to get as close as possible to the settlement of Romanovka. In this video we can see how the Russians were repelling another Ukraine attempt to restore control over this territory. The Russians brought their FPV drones, and Russian FPV drones attacked Ukrainian troopers that were trying to take under control this stronghold. Based on this video we have adjusted the map and we have colored the territory that used to be considered as a contested area back in the Russian favor. As for the city of Toretsk and as for the territory around the settlement, as you can see during the previous 24 hours, we haven't adjusted anything, just the regular situation on the ground. When talking about the Konstantinovka or the Chasiv Yar direction, during the previous 24 hours, we got several videos how the Russians were attacking positions of the armored forces of Ukraine in the central part of the city of Toretsk with two flamethrower systems. We see that the Russians for some reason decided to stop their offensive operation completely. Maybe after this artillery strike and maybe after this attack with two flamethrower system, the Russians will resume their attempt to take this part of the settlement under complete control, but as for now we see there is no movement from the Russian side. At the same time, almost every single day we start receiving more and more videos from the settlement of Konstantinovka. In this video we can see how the Russians were attacking and destroying Ukrainian vehicles that were moving in the central part of the settlement. Now the Russians have possibilities to fly and to control, to establish complete control over the Konstantinovka settlement with FPV drones, and the Russians uses this situation in full strength. Lots of geolocations, lots of videos how the Russians were attacking and destroying Ukrainian equipment along the central street of the settlement, which means that the Russians began preparation before possible offensive operation in this area as well. As for the Sivas direction, the Russians intensified their offensive operation, and today we got additional update from several pro-Russian resources. According to information we have, the Russians during the previous 24 hours managed to improve their position significantly. Several pro-Russian resources reported that as for the end of the 12th of May of 2025, the Russians established complete control over the southeastern part of the settlement. If this information is correct and if this information is true, then the Russians by the end of the 12th of May of 2025 managed to take under control more than 60% of the settlement of Verkhnykamenskaya. The Ukrainians currently control just the western part of the settlement, but due to this critical situation on the ground, we expect that Ukrainians would be forced to fall back, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but obviously during the next several weeks. Ukrainians would be forced to fall back, and this will allow the Russians to enter the operational space, and from this space the Russians would be able to attack in the southern direction with the purpose to force the Ukrainians in the area of Ivano-Darevka to fall back also in the direction of Siversk. So we see that the lines in the Siversk direction are collapsing, and most likely the battle and the Russian offensive is going to, the Russians are going to intensify their offensive activities. As for the Lyman direction, during the previous 24 hours we got a lot of changes. When talking about the settlement of Redkadub, there are very heavy clashes for this area. The Ukrainians understand the value of this village, so that is why the Ukrainians were forced to introduce additional forces on the ground with the purpose to stabilize the situation and not to allow the Russians to take this settlement under complete control. Because both the Russians and the Ukrainians understand if the Russians are able to establish complete control over this territory, then the Russians will be able to enter another operational space, and from this space the Russians would be able to advance in many directions. The Russians would be able to attack both in the northwestern directions towards the settlement of Barova, and the Russians would be able to continue offensive operation in the southern direction with the purpose to establish complete control over the settlement of Lyman. As for the Lyman itself, today we got report that the Russians managed to improve their positions in the vicinity of Kolodizhi. So this is the situation by the end of the 11th of May of 2025, and this is the situation by the end of the 12th of May. As you can see, the Russians improved their position significantly, and we have geolocation that confirms this. In this video we can see how Ukrainians of 60th Brigade were attacking Russian units in this area with FPV drones and with artillery. Based on this video, most of the mappers adjusted their maps. So the battle for Kolodizhi is underway, and we see that during the next days we are going to receive additional changes on the ground. When talking about the central Kupyansk direction, we have lots of important updates. Today, several pro-Russian resources reported that during the previous 24 hours, they managed to improve their positions in the southern directions towards the settlement of Barova and in the northern directions towards the settlement of Kupyansk. So if this information is correct, we believe that the Russians are trying to improve their positions. First of all, the Russians are trying to create additional gap and additional buffer zone to the south and additional buffer zone in the northern direction. This can be used by the Russians with the purpose to cross the river of Oskol and to begin advancing on the Ukrainian side of the river with the purpose to take the settlement of Kupyansk in Cauldron. So something big most likely is brewing in this area, because I'll remind you that there was a very long operational pause in this area, probably more than 1 month. The Russians were showing us no progress on the ground in this area, and most likely all those days, the Russians were regrouping and bringing additional forces. When talking about the northern directions, during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received anything special when talking about changes on the ground. Probably the most important video is coming from the Sumy region, where we can see how the Russians managed to discover 2 HIMARS launchers. So in this video, we can see how Ukrainians were attacking the settlement of Rylsk. I reminded that several days ago, the Ukrainians attacked the city of Rylsk with the HIMARS missiles, and as a result of those attacks, some buildings were damaged and destroyed. And in this video, we can see how the Russians managed to discover the positions of those HIMARS systems, and then the Russians destroyed both launchers. One launcher was destroyed as a result of drone attack, another launcher was destroyed as a result of Iskander strike. So Ukrainians lost 2 more HIMARS systems in the northern directions. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching, subscribe to my channel, push your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.